with their values, inconsistent with their traditions, inconsistent with their faith, that there was a defiance of the patriarch of the family, which leaves a lasting mark. And it sets your marriage up to be kind of toxic in a sense, because it could lead to her resenting you. Later in life, she may feel like you pressured her into this and that you caused her to have to disenfranchise from something she really aligns with, especially culture. Like your nationality and your heritage, that thousands of years that comes with you, that's your identity. And for you to just shun it and walk away from it because you now live somewhere else where that's not celebrated can be, I think, traumatic for that person. And so I would caution you that you are going to have to just work this out, because I don't think you can just, bail and jump ship and say, whatever, we're just going to do what we want, unless she's okay with that. But you run the risk of her feeling resentful later on.
Right. However, he's got culture too.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's really tough to give advice on this because
I almost feel like he's using that word strategically. Like he's like, in my culture, which is very important to me. It's like, listen, there is no Canadian cultural book that I had to read in therapy which said, and by the way, it's very deeply important to the Canadians and a long-held tradition that you always shack up before. No, that's not a thing. It's contemporary culture, which is fine, and I'm not disqualifying it, Nick. Nick's already putting up the hand sign of like, how can you do that? He's doing the shruggy shoulders thing.
Come on.
I mean, I'm saying if you did a cost-benefit analysis on both of them, which side stands to have the most harm? I think the answer would be her. She has an entire tribe that doesn't approve of this, and he is one person who would prefer this.
I would agree. And then I think at the end of the day, it comes down to, is this the thing that you're willing to dig your heels into? Mm-hmm. Is this the thing that is so important to you that you're willing to risk the relationship? Because I agree with Jim in the sense that if you guys decide, nope, screw it, we're going to do it our way, there's probably going to be some kind of long-term ramifications to that. It could just be just between her and her family, but it's quite likely that could trickle over into your relationship. How important is it to you that you live together before marriage? Mm. And if it is that important, then fine, then stick to that and right. Go for it.
But I would throw out one more caveat to this, Nick, because I would ask him, if he were sitting right here, let's give him a name. I'd call him Bill.
Okay, Bill.
He seems like a Bill, Canadian Bill. If I said, hey, Bill, listen, if you guys do move in together, Daddy says go for it. You guys go, she comes over to your house this weekend. You guys move all in and you're living together, okay? So you do this trial run. You're taking it seriously. It's not pretend. You guys have been together for a while. She's your fiance. So it doesn't work out. After living together for a couple of years, things start to fall apart. You realize it's not going to work out. What are you going to do? The answer is probably, well, we would separate. We would break up. She would go back to her life. I'd go back to mine. Because he says at the end of this question, marriage doesn't even matter to me. It's not even a thing to me. Right. So if that's actually true, then what do you care if you have to marry her first for her to come live with you? Because if it didn't work out, you're going to take the same exact course of action. You're going to divorce her, right? So it doesn't matter to you, right? You said marriage doesn't matter to you. So if that's true, if it's culturally not important to you, if you barely even recognize the piece of paper, then what do you care? Go ahead and do it because it's important to them. You get what you want. You can live together. If it doesn't work out, you have the exact same real life experience that you would have had if she just said yes and moved in right now.
Good point.
Checkmate, Canada. Take that. Okay, so now
Jim does not speak for everybody.
I do not speak for all of America, caveat. Also, the data that I mentioned earlier. So yes. the question of does it improve a marriage's chances of working out if people move in together, or does it decrease them? And the answer is, it is one of the highest factors that tells me that it might end in divorce. Your likelihood of ending in divorce goes up abruptly if you premaritally cohabitate, if you move in together before marriage.
Okay, first, you didn't give me a chance to answer that before you gave me the answer.
Oh, you want to take a guess?
You said you were going to.
Well, I didn't want to leave you. What if you guess wrong, Nick? I don't want to hurt your credibility to the Canadians.
So you're saying that you didn't allow me that because you didn't want me to look bad.
To protect you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, thanks, Jim.
But it's an interesting piece of data, right?
Doesn't surprise me.
Oh. Okay.
No, doesn't. That's what I would have guessed.
That is what you would have guessed.
And the reason why
let the
is
record show
because
he would have guessed that.
Who is most likely to wait until marriage to move in together? Most likely it's the religious.
Okay.
What would you say is the most likely reason that people don't get divorced?
Is some kind of dogma?
Yeah, has to do with religion. So they're more likely to follow that guideline, and they're more likely to work things out in case of marital conflict, because it's a sin or the church doesn't agree with it if we get divorced.
See, this is why I interrupted you, to preserve your credibility. Because actually, Nick, I'm going to actually you. The data shows that the religious are just as likely to get divorced. That is not a protection. There's just as many divorced people in the pews as there are at the Penn and Teller congregation thing. So it actually doesn't protect you. What we see in the data is it is more likely to increase your chances of divorce because you simulate a version of the relationship in which you are not married, and then you transition to a version of the relationship in which you are, but nothing has changed. The only thing that changes is the jewelry you wear in your left hand and a piece of paper and maybe your bank accounts. So it's hard for you to have this abrupt, I have changed my ways, this is now an official thing, and it's easy to stay in that mentality of this can end and I'm okay with that because you were mentally prepared for that before the marriage because you were just dating. You have an escape plan. Whenever you transition and all that's added is a piece of paper, there's not this newness. There's not this chapter difference. And so what we see is people kind of just ease their way into this, and it doesn't have that starkness. If it doesn't have a stark beginning, the stark end of it doesn't scare you. And a lot of people avoid divorce, in part what you're talking about is true, because there's a stigma to it, because it's scary to do this. But if it wasn't scary to begin it, if you eased your way into it and one Wednesday you're not married and Friday you are, then it's not scary to undo it, where Friday you are married and Monday you're not. Because it wasn't stark in the beginning, it isn't stark at the end. And so we just notice that that's a factor that can increase the risk of divorce because they just don't have that sense of like, oh my gosh, this is a big deal. Like we also have data that shows that if you have a wedding, this is actually an interesting bell curve that if you don't have a wedding at all, the likelihood of divorce is increased. Because it wasn't stark, it wasn't in front of other people. You don't feel the sense of like shame if you get a divorce because nobody saw you do it. If you have too big of a wedding and you spend too much money, also increases your risk of divorce. And
Really?
The data seems to track that it's because it sets you up to fail. You have financial insecurity at the beginning of the marriage, and there's a resentment of like, oh, we did this for your stupid dress.
No, that does. That
the
part
bell
makes
curve
sense.
says that the increase of marriage holding together tends to be when you have a modest wedding. So interesting little data. We should do a whole show on this, Nick. I have like a whole sheet of like factors that increase and decrease the likelihood of divorce.
We should do like a Jim and Nick's wedding show.
Ah.
But then, what'll happen is then when we post it online, because you only get so many characters, it will just say Jim and Nick's wedding.
Yeah.
Which actually will probably get a lot of hits.
Yeah, we'll actually get more hits for that.
Yeah.
So
right.
Interesting data anyway. So good luck to you, Canadian Bill, and lean in on that relationship. Be sensitive to the culture, brother. And, ultimately I'm rooting for your relationship. You two are going to have to make a decision together. And if that means departing from her culture, just make sure that you're not pushing her into it. Make sure you're including her in that conversation and sensitive to her needs. You're not just fighting her family, Bubba. You're also fighting her. And I want you to be careful with that. That could set you up to fail.
Right. Okay. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we are going to read a listener mail about society and fitting in. You're listening to Pod Therapy.
We're back. You're listening to Pod Therapy, and the next question is from a man who doesn't fit male stereotypes. Society says I'm not man enough. How can I be me? Hi, Nick and Jim.
Hi.
I'm a 30-year-old man with many feminine traits and interests. I'm extremely introverted and a highly sensitive person. I've always felt a lot of shame about these parts of myself and have tried to fake being more extroverted and masculine than I really am. This was exhausting and made me miserable. Lately, I've been working with a therapist to help me discover who I really am and what my values are. I now know that there's nothing wrong with me, and I love these qualities about myself. I'm living more in line with my values and allowing myself to explore my interests without self-judgment or shame most of the time. This has increased my self-confidence and decreased my depression. The problem I'm having is that while I know it's okay to be the way I am aware and constantly being reminded that it's not what society values, and there is still a male hierarchy where I'm pretty low, so my confidence is frequently shaken, and some of that shame comes back, and I have to redo the work I've done to build myself up. Do you guys have any advice on how I can make that self-confidence more permanent and make me more immune to society's ideas of what I should be like? Any advice on how to get by in a world that says there's something wrong with you and is always trying to fix you? Thanks.
All right. Well, first, good for you for being in therapy and
Yes.
and addressing this. And my thought behind this, reading this, this whole idea of fitting in, and the way I think our society is kind of set up is like you have to create an identity, but that identity has to fit into the categories that society places, and sometimes it's really difficult to do because we don't all fit like that.
Right.
But one thing that I think is very important to remember is that I think there's a lot more people out there like you than there are people that completely fit in. I think there's a lot of people who do what you did, where you kind of give the appearance that you're fitting in, but you still don't feel comfortable. I think there's a lot of people out there that do that.
Yeah.
By you just being out and open about that and being able to say and to just be you and just be who you are, I think is very inspiring. I think a lot of people can take that and grow from that. We're not, our world doesn't need more people that fit into these already existing categories. We need more people like you who are just you, and you may fit into this category in some ways and this category other ways, and you can kind of bounce around.
Our president of our fan club, Dawn, who's a therapist too, she always says, you got to be you, everybody else is taken.
Right.
And I like that line a lot. But I think it also goes back to that circle of trust, the Native American circle of trust that you talked about in an earlier segment, how people need a sense of belonging. And I kind of hear the writers saying, that's kind of what's lacking. And so I think identify that, right? And go find your tribe. Like find people that share your values, that accept you for who you are. I think that's important for each of us to have. But I really want to validate what the writer's talking about, because some listeners are probably hearing this and going, what's he talking about? There is an invisible masculine thingy that's like this weird grid tangible structure that permeates at least American society, where we talk about it as like the wolf pack, right? Like there's alpha wolf and there's all these different things. And humans do this too, and part of it's a remnant of our tribalism, part of it's just masculinity doing what it does. And so for this individual to say, listen, I went through the self-acceptance, but in society I get picked last for the kickball team, and I kind of get put off in a corner as, what is he? Is he this? Is he that? Not sure. And, not really picking him to lead the team or whatever. And I think that it's really powerful that you bring this up, because this is part of the conversion that I'm grateful to see society doing as feminism influences us as well. That we're letting go of some of these patriarchal structures that are sort of artificial and just enforced, and we're starting to look to people to lead or be valuable based on merit, based on their contribution, that they are qualified because they are, not because when I look at their LinkedIn profile, that's the picture, And I think that that's important, Nick, because I resonate with what this person's saying. I've met lots of folks in life that whenever, and you and I, we've worked with lots of professionals in our corporate structure. We've interviewed lots of people. And sometimes you'll look at somebody and we are human, even though we're therapists, we're likely to jump to a conclusion about them and think, oh, this person's that kind of archetype of humanity, right? They fit in that category. But then we interview them and we realize, whoa, they were nothing like what we thought. And so my encouragement to you is lean in on relationships, break stereotypes, break assumptions by humanizing yourself and letting people meet you for who you really are, because that's how you reveal your value. And you know what? I think 7 out of 10 times humans are going to respond to who you are, even if they had an idea of who they thought you are before that.
Yes. One thing you said, Jim, that stuck out to me, you said something about leadership. And I'm looking at my phone right now because I just came across, this TED Talk that I came across the other day. It's called The Hidden Power of Not Always Fitting In by Marilyn. Hold on.
Wow, that's really opportune. The Hidden Power of Not Always Fitting In. It's a TED
Marilyn
Talk.
Cantwell.
Is that findable on YouTube?
Yes.
Okay.
So go on YouTube, The Hidden Power of Not Always Fitting In. Just type that in and it'll pop up. One thing that she said in there is funny because I just came across this the other day, but one thing she was talking about in there is she makes this point about leadership and how when we think of entrepreneurs, people who have really done something amazing for society, they don't fit into one category. What they kind of have they create their own, she calls it an island. They create their own island. They find something that they feel like they fit very close to, but then they build their own island just off of that, so that they still have influence from all these other areas. And people